They told you it was a kidnapping. $6 million in Bitcoin by February the 9th. Ransom notes, not one but two, sent to news stations across the country. TMZ, local Arizona television stations, major national networks. Every outlet received the same story. A $6 million demand, a hard deadline, a threat against an 84-year-old woman's life. And the notes were written well. The grammar was, as one media figure described it, perfect, structured, and layered. Detailed in ways that seemed to prove they were written by someone who was actually there. And for 32 days, the entire country believed it. Law enforcement believed it. The FBI set up a forward command post in Tucson, deploying some of the Bureau's most experienced agents. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos held press conference after press conference telling the public that he was confident Nancy Guthrie had been kidnapped. He personally believed she was still alive and that his investigators were closing in. Search and rescue teams swept the Sonoran Desert. Volunteer groups drove out from neighboring states. A Mexican missing persons organization, Madres Buscadores de Sonora, women who have spent years finding bodies in the desert that official agencies missed, traveled across the border specifically to help. A $1 million reward was announced. Then it was raised. Then it was made payable in cash anonymously to lower the barrier for anyone who might know something but was afraid. Every lead went cold. Both deadlines passed. No exchange, no response, no escalation, no third note. And then, not in a court document, not in an FBI press release, not in any official statement, but quietly, in the middle of a cable news interview, a CNN analyst who spent decades inside the highest levels of the NYPD said something that should have stopped this entire narrative cold. He said whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. He wasn't describing the investigation going wrong. He was describing what happened at the front door of Nancy Guthrie's home in the earliest hours of February 1st, 2026. And if he is right, and the evidence point by point says that he is, then everything you have been told about this case from the beginning needs to be reconsidered from the ground up. Because the ransom notes were not a ransom demand. They were a cover story. And what they were designed to cover up is something that the people responsible have been counting on no one saying plainly. We are going to say it today. 5 pieces of evidence, 1 conclusion, and a theory built not from rumor or speculation, but from the confirmed facts that have been sitting in plain sight for over a month waiting for someone to line them up. When you see what those 5 pieces of evidence actually show, and what they show when you see them together, you will not look at this case the same way again. Let's establish what we know, not what we've been told, not the official theory, not the narrative that has been built over the past 33 days through press conferences and tip lines and reward announcements, what we can actually verify from confirmed evidence, and on the record statements from people whose professional credibility is staked on accuracy. January 31st, 2026. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, takes an Uber from her home to a family member's house in Tucson for dinner. She has dinner. She is dropped back off at her home at 9:48 p.m. Her garage door closes at 9:50 p.m. She is inside. She is alive. She is by every indication going to bed in her own home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. The same home she has lived in for years. That is the last normal moment on record. At 1:47 a.m., the Google Nest doorbell camera at the front of her home is disconnected, not shut off remotely. Disconnected in a way that suggests it was physically interfered with at the device level. At 2:12 a.m., a motion sensor on a separate camera detects a person on the property. No video is available from that sensor because Nancy did not have an active recording subscription. At 2:28 a.m., the most significant timestamp in this entire case, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnects from her cell phone, the device that has been monitoring her heart rate, maintaining her cardiac rhythm, syncing with her phone, goes dark. 3 timestamps, 41 minutes. Something happened in that window. The next morning, February 1st, Nancy does not appear for an online church service she had planned to attend with a friend. The friend tries to reach her. No answer. A family member goes to the house. The doors are locked. Nancy's phone is inside. Her purse is inside. Her personal belongings, the things an 84-year-old woman would take with her if she chose to go somewhere, are all inside. She is not. Law enforcement is called. Sheriff Nanos arrives. The scene is declared a crime scene. Nanos looks at the evidence, the blood near the front door, the locked house, the belongings left behind, the disabled camera. He says clearly he believes Nancy Guthrie was abducted against her will. The FBI joins the investigation within hours. Federal resources, federal database access, federal forensic capacity are mobilized for a kidnapping case in suburban Tucson. And then the ransom notes arrive. Multiple news outlets, starting with a local Arizona station and then TMZ, report receiving ransom communications. The notes demand $6 million in Bitcoin. They set a deadline of February 9th, 8 days out. They include details about Nancy's Apple Watch and about a floodlight at her home that law enforcement had not yet made public. That specificity, those insider details, caused the FBI to treat the notes seriously. We are aware of a ransom letter that was sent to the local media and then to national outlets. As with every lead, we are taking it seriously. Heath Janke, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Phoenix division, confirmed publicly that the Bureau was taking the notes seriously and investigating their authenticity. And that is where the official narrative set like concrete, kidnapping for ransom, $6 million, Bitcoin, February 9th deadline. For 32 days, every piece of coverage, every law enforcement press conference, every expert commentary on cable news has operated inside that frame. The question being asked was, who has Nancy Guthrie? Where is she being held? And how do we get her back? Those are the wrong questions because the kidnapping narrative, as we are about to show piece by piece, does not fit the evidence. It has never fit the evidence. And the experts who have spent their careers inside exactly this type of crime have been saying so in careful, measured language since the first week. 5 pieces of evidence. Let's go through each one. Let's begin with the ransom notes, because when you look at the notes carefully, when you stop accepting them at face value and actually analyze them as evidence, they are the first and most critical indicator that this was never a kidnapping for financial gain. Multiple ransom notes arrived in the days following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The notes demanded $6 million in Bitcoin. They set a deadline of February 9th, 2026. They included specific details of the Apple Watch, the floodlight that gave the impression of insider knowledge. And they were, by most accounts, well-written, coherent, structured, not the frantic, misspelled demands of a panicked criminal, but something more deliberate. And they were sent to media outlets, TMZ, a local Arizona television newsroom, journalists, not the Guthrie family, not law enforcement, not anyone who had the authority, access, or resources to authorize a $6 million Bitcoin transfer. I want you to stop and actually sit with that. Because in the noise of round-the-clock coverage, this detail, the single most operationally significant detail in the entire ransom narrative, has been mentioned briefly and then moved past as though it were a procedural oddity rather than the fundamental contradiction it actually is. Think about what a ransom demand is. At its core, it is a negotiation instrument. It is a communication designed to initiate a transaction. You hold something of value. You contact the people who want that thing back. You state your price. You wait for a response. You negotiate. That is the architecture of every ransom situation in the history of organized crime. From the Lindbergh kidnapping to modern cartel operations to corporate hostage situations overseas, the communication goes to the people with the money. Always. Because without that communication, there is no leverage. Without leverage, there is no transaction. Without a transaction, there is no point to the kidnapping. You do not send a ransom note to TMZ. You do not send a $6 million demand to a newsroom where it will be immediately photographed, published online, forwarded to the FBI, and splashed across every television screen in America within hours. That is not a ransom demand. That is a press release. That is a document designed not to initiate a private negotiation, but to create a very specific, very public story. FBI Special Agent in Charge Heath Janke, the Bureau's lead official in Phoenix overseeing this investigation, said publicly, in a way that should have commanded far more attention than it received, that the ransom note did not include any means for the family to contact the sender. There was a Bitcoin address where money could theoretically be deposited. There was no phone number, no email, no instruction for how the Guthrie family could respond, reach out, or initiate any kind of communication with whoever claimed to be holding their mother. Janke confirmed that there had been no contact at all with the Guthrie family since the messages were sent to media, and he said carefully but clearly that this was unusual in kidnapping cases and that there would normally be contact by this point. Unusual. In kidnapping cases, there would normally be contact by now. The special agent in charge of the FBI's involvement in this case is publicly flagging that the core mechanic of the kidnapping theory, The ransom communication is not behaving like a real ransom communication. Then there is the voice of retired FBI Special Agent Johnny Grusing. Grusing spent 25 years in the Denver field office working exactly these kinds of cases. He has been publicly analyzing the Nancy Guthrie investigation, and his assessment of the ransom notes has been consistent and unambiguous. The kidnap for ransom theory does not add up because the alleged kidnappers never reached out to the Guthrie family directly. He said, from his own professional experience, when criminals take someone for money, they contact the family immediately. There is urgency in that contact. There is often a rapid back and forth, the family asking for proof of life, the kidnapper asserting control, both sides beginning the negotiation that determines the outcome. That contact begins within hours, not days, and it goes to the family, not to a cable news network. None of that happened here. No contact to the family, no channel for negotiation, no urgency from the alleged kidnappers. 2 notes each to media outlets, each setting a deadline. And then silence, absolute silence. When the first deadline passed on February 5th, nothing. When the second deadline passed on February 9th, nothing. No third note, no escalation, no new demand, no indication that whoever sent those notes was paying any attention to whether the deadline had been met. In a real ransom kidnapping, a missed deadline is a crisis. The kidnapper responds. They assert consequences. They communicate something because the entire structure of the leverage depends on the threat being credible and ongoing. When a deadline passes with nothing, when the alleged captor goes completely silent, it means one of 2 things. Either the kidnapper panicked and abandoned the demand entirely, or the deadline was never real. Given that there were 2 deadlines, both of which passed with silence, the second explanation is the one that fits. The deadline was never real. The notes were not the communication of a kidnapper waiting for payment. They were the communication of someone constructing a story. And if that is true, if the ransom notes were a fabricated narrative rather than a genuine demand, then the question is not, who has Nancy Guthrie and when are they going to release her? The question is, what actually happened at that front door, and why was a kidnapping story built on top of it? Before we get to that, now we need to establish one more pillar of the ransom theory's failure. Because the family asked, the FBI asked, the entire world was watching and waiting, and no one ever showed that Nancy Guthrie was alive. On February 4th, 2026, 3 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, Savannah Guthrie stood in front of a camera with her 2 siblings. We live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive. She was composed in the way that people are composed when composure is the only thing they have left. And she said, "We live in a world where voices and images are easily manipulated. We need to know without a doubt that she is alive and that you have her." Think about what that statement represents. This is a woman who is a national news anchor. She has been briefed directly and continuously by the FBI agents running this investigation. She has access to law enforcement at the highest levels. The most sophisticated investigative resources in the country are actively deployed on behalf of her mother. And 3 days in, she is publicly saying on camera that she does not know, that she cannot confirm that her mother is alive. Because no one has told her, because no one has shown her. Because whoever allegedly had Nancy Guthrie never provided any evidence of it. Not a phone call, not a recorded message, not a photograph, not a video, not a third-party intermediary passing information, not even a handwritten note that referenced something only Nancy would know, something the family could verify, something that would take 30 seconds to produce if you actually had the person you claimed to have. 2 ransom notes, a $6 million demand, an 8-day deadline, and in the entire duration of that supposed kidnapping in progress, not one proof of life. The significance of this cannot be overstated. In any legitimate ransom kidnapping, proof of life is not a courtesy. It is the operational foundation of the entire enterprise. Without it, the leverage disappears. The family cannot negotiate in good faith for someone they cannot confirm is alive. Law enforcement cannot justify authorizing a payment. No financial institution, no Bitcoin transfer service, no mechanism for moving $6 million would operate without some verification that the transaction has a legitimate purpose. Proof of life is not an extra step. It is the prerequisite for every step that follows. Former FBI agent Grusing analyzed the ransom communications in detail and identified something that is easy to miss in surface-level coverage. The person or persons who sent the emails to media outlets appeared to be an entirely separate operation from the individual seen on the doorbell camera footage. the lone, masked, armed figure at Nancy's front door, and the person or persons who drafted the ransom notes and sent them to newsrooms. Grusing's read was that these did not appear to be the same operational entity working in coordination. The emails had no mechanism for Savannah to respond, no way to request proof, no channel for anything that would look like an actual kidnapping negotiation. Now, let's layer in the medical reality that makes the absence of proof of life not just suspicious, but potentially definitive. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. According to Sheriff Nanos, confirmed publicly from the first week of the investigation, she was dependent on daily medication for a heart condition. Without her medication, he said her life could be at risk within 24 hours. This was not a theoretical concern. It was specific. It was confirmed by her medical history, and it was treated by law enforcement as an active emergency. Nanos contacted local pharmacies. He publicly appealed to anyone holding Nancy to ensure she received her medication. He used the 24-hour window as the center of every public statement about the urgency of finding her. 24 hours without her medication. That is the window. She was taken in the early hours of February 1st. If she was alive and in someone's custody, whoever held her needed to either have her medication or obtain it within the first day, and they would need to continue providing it every day for the entire duration of the captivity. This is not a small operational challenge. It requires either a pharmacy connection, a medical contact, or an ability to obtain and administer a specific prescription medication to a specific patient on a specific schedule. For kidnappers who could not even manage to send a ransom note to the right people, who had no communication channel with the family they were allegedly extorting, managing an 84-year-old cardiac patient's daily prescription regimen is a very large ask. Was there any indication in either ransom note that Nancy's captors were aware of her medical needs? Any reference to her medication? Any assurance that she was receiving care? Any communication through any channel that would suggest a living, medicated, monitored Nancy Guthrie was somewhere receiving the treatment her doctor had prescribed? None, not a word. And now, the pacemaker, her cardiac device, the pacemaker managing her heart rhythm, stopped syncing with her cell phone at 2:28 a.m. On February 1st, combined with the doorbell camera disconnecting at 1:47 a.m. and the motion sensor detecting a person at 2:12 a.m. Investigators have a precise 41-minute window during which someone was at or inside Nancy Guthrie's home, and the interaction that resulted in her disappearance occurred at 2:28 a.m. That device went dark. Whether because Nancy was moved beyond Bluetooth range or because of something else entirely, is a question investigators have not publicly resolved. But that 2:28 a.m. timestamp is the last confirmed electronic trace of Nancy Guthrie's existence anywhere. Against that backdrop, Michael Gould, a former Nassau County Police Lieutenant and founder of the NYPD's K-9 unit with professional experience in missing persons and abduction cases, looked at the publicly available evidence and made an assessment that should have dominated the coverage far more than it did. His conclusion stated to the Mirror US, based on Nancy's age, her medication dependency, the physical evidence at the scene, and the total absence of any proof of life, she most likely died within 72 hours of her disappearance. 72 hours from February 1st is February 4th, 5 days before the ransom deadline of February 9th. Gould was not speculating irresponsibly. He was applying basic clinical and investigative logic to confirmed facts. An elderly woman with a life-threatening cardiac condition, relying on daily medication that she did not have, subjected to physical trauma at the entrance of her own home, removed in the early hours of the morning by someone who had no mechanism for her ongoing medical care. The probability that she survived even a few days in those conditions is extremely low. And if Gould is right, if Nancy Guthrie was gone by February 4th, then the ransom deadline of February 9th was set by someone who either knew she was already dead and was using the deadline to buy time, or who set it after the fact specifically because they knew she would be gone before it arrived. Either way, the deadline was not a countdown to a transaction. It was theater. We will come back to the medication window in full in Act 6. But first, let's go back to the beginning, back to the moment where John Miller says things began to go wrong. Back to the blood on the porch. There is a man whose professional opinion on violent crime carries particular weight in this context. His name is John Miller. He is CNN's chief law enforcement and intelligence analyst, a former deputy commissioner for intelligence and counterterrorism at the NYPD. an organization that runs the second largest intelligence operation in the United States after the CIA itself. Before that, he spent years embedded at the FBI at the national leadership level. He has worked counterterrorism cases, organized crime investigations, kidnapping cases, and murder investigations. He has sat across the table from people who committed these crimes. He has spent his career reading the gap between what a crime appears to be and what it actually is. When John Miller analyzed the Nancy Guthrie case, he made a statement that was analytically precise and that has not received the attention it deserves. He said whatever type of crime this started as, things began to go wrong very quickly. He was not talking about the investigation. He was not commenting on law enforcement's response or the FBI's management of the case. He was talking about what happened at Nancy Guthrie's front door, and his primary piece of evidence for that assessment was the blood. Forensic investigators found blood stains at or near the entrance of Nancy Guthrie's home. The exact location and quantity were not publicly described in detail, but law enforcement confirmed the blood was present, found on her front porch, at and near the entry to her home. Subsequent DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Nancy Guthrie. Her blood outside her front door in a kidnapping where the operational goal is financial, where you have taken an elderly woman for ransom, and your entire plan depends on keeping her alive long enough to collect. Blood at the point of entry is a catastrophic complication. You need the victim to survive transport. You need her physically stable, conscious if possible, manageable. A confrontation at the front door that produces bloodshed is the opposite of a clean operation. It creates visible evidence. It alerts neighbors. It generates exactly the kind of physical trace that forensic investigators will spend weeks processing. Any competent planner of a ransom kidnapping would design the extraction specifically to avoid this. And yet, blood at the front door before she was even moved. John Miller's framing as to things went wrong very quickly carries a very specific implication. It implies that there was a plan, and that the plan changed, that whoever came to that door that night had an intention, and something at the moment of contact with Nancy caused that intention to be overtaken by violence that was not originally part of the design. Something reactive, something that happened faster than the plan anticipated. And this is where the evidence becomes even more dissonant with the kidnapping theory. For weeks, law enforcement would not confirm whether there had been forced entry at the residence. Sheriff Nanos and his department declined to answer directly whether any doors, windows, or locks had been compromised. A criminal attorney analyzing the case publicly noted this reticence. The unwillingness to answer a basic factual question about how the perpetrator entered the home suggested something out of the ordinary about the method of entry. Because if it were standard forced entry, there would be no particular reason to withhold the information. Consider the implication. There is blood on the porch but no confirmed forced entry. If there was no forced entry, if no door was kicked in, no window was broken, no lock was picked, then someone opened that door. Either the door was unlocked and the perpetrator simply pushed it, or someone on the inside opened it for them. Retired FBI agent Johnny Grusing offered a careful but significant analysis of this point. Looking at the doorbell camera footage and the footage showing the masked man covering the lens with a gloved hand. Then, using foliage to obscure it, Grusing asked a rhetorical question that gets to the heart of this issue. He said, "Is it possible that the suspect was pressing the doorbell or knocking loudly, trying to get Nancy to answer the door and covering himself from the camera so she would not see a masked person and would open the door in confusion?" He said that if that was the case, the suspect was probably not primarily there to rob the home. Think about that scenario. Someone at 2 a.m. knocking at Nancy Guthrie's door. Someone she may not have seen clearly because the camera was covered. Someone whose face was hidden by the time she looked through whatever opening. Nancy, 84 years old, possibly groggy, possibly confused, opening the door to someone she could not see clearly. And then at that moment, blood on the porch. Former FBI and CIA officer Tracy Walder addressed the targeting question with language that is important here. "It is just too targeted, Brian. This is too, you have been there. You have been there for such a long time. Like, this is not a house that you just come upon and decide to rob. It is just not that." She said, "It is just too targeted. This is not a house you just come upon and decide to rob. It's just not that." The Catalina foothills is a sprawling residential area with many properties. Coming to this specific house at this specific time with this specific level of preparation, mask, gloves, backpack, awareness of the doorbell camera, is not random. It is the result of prior knowledge, prior surveillance, prior planning that chose this house, this woman, this night. Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers built directly on this analysis. He told Parade magazine exclusively, "I have never thought this was a robbery gone wrong." His reasoning is layered and precise. He said professional burglars are careful. They case properties. They learn when owners are away. They enter homes specifically when the residents are not present, because having a person inside turns a property crime into a violent crime, and that dramatically increases both the risk and the legal consequences. A seasoned burglar does not enter a home at 2 a.m. when an 84-year-old woman is almost certainly inside. Rogers also pointed out that there has been no confirmed report of anything being taken from Nancy Guthrie's home. If this were a robbery, even one that spiraled into something worse, there would be missing valuables, jewelry, electronics, cash. Nothing has been identified as stolen, which means whoever entered that home was either not there to take valuables or the theft was secondary to whatever their primary objective was. Not a robbery, not a random home invasion, not an opportunistic crime, something specific, something that was planned, something that brought someone to that exact door, armed and masked, and prepared to cover the camera before the interaction even began. And something went wrong at the moment of that interaction. The blood tells us that. Now, let's talk about what happened after the front door, because 40 minutes is not a kidnapping timeline. Let's talk about 40 minutes. The official timeline, as confirmed by investigators and publicly released by Sheriff Nanos, breaks down like this. Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera was disconnected at 1:47 a.m. A motion sensor on a separate camera detected a person at 2:12 a.m. Though no video was recorded because Nancy did not have an active subscription to the surveillance service. Her pacemaker disconnected from her cell phone at 2:28 a.m. That window from the doorbell going dark to the pacemaker going dark is approximately 41 minutes. 41 minutes during which someone was inside or at Nancy Guthrie's home. Jim Clemente is a former FBI supervisory special agent and behavioral profiler who spent his career specializing in abductions and violent crimes. When Clemente analyzed this case, he identified the 40-minute window as one of the most analytically significant pieces of evidence available. He said directly, "The suspect spent approximately 40 minutes in the home and crime scene, and that is a very long time for a simple targeted kidnapping." He added that the extended time inside increased the perpetrator's risk significantly. Let's unpack why that is true. If your objective is a ransom kidnapping, if you are there to take a specific person from their home and hold them at another location until a financial demand is met, then speed is your most fundamental operational requirement. The longer you're at the scene, the greater your exposure. Every additional minute you spend at the crime scene is a minute during which a neighbor could look out a window, a car could drive past, a friend could send a text and get no response, and call someone to check. The nearby security camera you didn't know about could be recording. Your vehicle could be spotted and noted. A surveillance system you didn't neutralize could capture footage. Your physical presence, your breath, your skin cells, your footprints, any trace of you is compounding with every passing minute. Professional abductors understand this at a fundamental level. The FBI's own kidnapping response protocols and the professional literature on ransom kidnappings are consistent. A clean, professional abduction is fast. You move in, you take the target, you move out. You minimize your time at the primary location in every way possible. Minutes at the scene, not 40. Clemente also noted that the suspect in this case showed multiple markers of someone who was not a professional. He was not prepared to deal with the doorbell camera. His response to discovering it was ad hoc, first using his gloved hand and then improvising with foliage, which is not a planned countermeasure. He had no tools visible in the footage to force entry from the front, suggesting the method of entry was something other than a prepared forced breach. And critically, he did not wear any kind of mouth covering. Clemente noted that we shed DNA through our breath constantly. Every minute the suspect spent inside that home, he was leaving biological trace evidence that could eventually identify him. 40 minutes of unmasked breathing inside a crime scene. 40 minutes of a non-professional, unplanned, escalating presence in a house where something had already gone wrong at the front door. Now ask the question, what was he doing for 40 minutes? 40 minutes is not a timeline for getting one 84-year-old woman out of a house. That could be done in minutes. Even if the victim is resistant or immobile, the physical act of moving a person from their bedroom to a waiting vehicle is not a 40-minute operation under any circumstances. So whatever filled those 40 minutes was not simply the extraction. 40 minutes is, however, a timeline for a search. Think through what 40 minutes inside a house looks like. That is enough time to systematically go through every room, to open a filing cabinet and look through its contents, to check multiple drawers and multiple pieces of furniture, to look through paperwork, documents, personal effects, to access a computer or tablet and review its contents, to look through a personal safe or lockbox, to search deliberately and with focus for something specific, something that may not be immediately obvious, something that requires looking through materials rather than just grabbing a visible item. That is what 40 minutes looks like. That is what 40 minutes suggests. Former FBI Special Agent Greg Rogers, who has been one of the most analytically rigorous outside voices on this case, offered what may be the most important interpretive framework for the 40-minute question. He told Parade that he believes it is highly likely that someone who knew Guthrie or who had knowledge of her life through service relationships, home maintenance, healthcare, yard care, deliveries, any role that would have given access to her schedule, her home layout, and her daily routines was involved. He said that person could have been recruited to provide information about Nancy's security systems, her schedule, her vulnerabilities, or could have been the perpetrator themselves using knowledge acquired over time through trusted access. Someone who knew where things were in that house. Someone who had a reason to be looking for something specific. Someone who came with a purpose that went beyond simply taking an elderly woman for ransom. Because if ransom were the only goal, 40 minutes inside the house would be 40 minutes of unnecessary and catastrophic risk. Former FBI agent Guthrie added his own reading. The suspect may have had a personal grievance against Nancy. He may have been there because of something personal, some conflict or history or relationship, and the original plan may not have been what it ended up becoming. Nancy may have recognized him at the door. That recognition, that moment of identification, may have been what caused the situation to escalate violently and rapidly before it could be controlled, which would explain both the blood at the entry point and the unplanned nature of what followed. The FBI has never publicly confirmed that Nancy Guthrie left that home alive. The investigation has proceeded on the assumption of abduction, and that may ultimately prove correct, but 40 minutes tells us something that cannot be reasoned away. Whatever happened inside that home was not a clean, fast, professional kidnapping extraction. It was a protracted, chaotic, unplanned series of actions by someone who was managing a situation that had gone badly wrong. And all of that, the blood, the 40 minutes, the no forced entry, the covered camera needs to be read together with the last piece of evidence, the one that closes the case against the kidnapping theory entirely. The medication window. February 1st, Nancy Guthrie is reported missing. February 9th, the ransom deadline, 8 days. That is the window the notes claimed. 8 days to produce $6 million in Bitcoin, or the people who allegedly held Nancy Guthrie would follow through on their threat. 8 days. Now, let's look at what the people who wrote those notes apparently failed to account for. Sheriff Chris Nanos made Nancy Guthrie's medical condition the center of his public communications from the very first press conference. He was not vague about it. He said clearly, repeatedly, and with evident urgency, Nancy required daily medication for a heart condition, and without that medication, her life could be at risk within 24 hours. He contacted local pharmacies, asking them to flag any attempt to fill a prescription matching her profile, while he made public appeals directly to anyone who might be holding Nancy, asking them to ensure she received her medicine. He treated the medication window not as a background detail, but as the most immediate life-threatening variable in the entire case, 24 hours. She was taken in the early hours of February 1st. If she was alive, if she was actually in someone's custody, receiving the care that would make a ransom situation viable, she needed her medication by February 2nd at the very latest, and she would need to continue receiving it every single day for the duration of any captivity. That is the baseline medical reality of this situation. Now, examine the ransom communications against that baseline. Did either ransom note acknowledge Nancy's medical condition? No. Did either note offer any assurance that she was receiving her medication? No. Did any communication through any channel ever suggest that whoever claimed to hold Nancy Guthrie had any awareness of or concern for her cardiac medication needs? No. The people who allegedly kidnapped an 84-year-old woman for a $6 million ransom, who, according to one media figure, did extensive research to include insider details like the Apple Watch and the floodlight in their notes, Those same people apparently had no plan for keeping their alleged victim alive. They did not mention the medication. They did not demonstrate awareness of the 24-hour window. They set a deadline of February 9th, 8 days out, for a woman who without her daily cardiac medication would likely not survive more than a day or two. The math does not work. It has never worked. And Michael Gould, a former Nassau County Police lieutenant and founder of the NYPD Canine Unit, a professional with deep experience in missing persons cases, looked at that math and reached a conclusion that the mainstream coverage did not give the attention it deserved. His assessment, given exclusively to the Mirror US, was this: based on Nancy's age, her medical dependency, the physical evidence of trauma at the scene, and the complete absence of any proof that she was alive and receiving care, she most likely died within the first 72 hours of her disappearance. 72 hours from the early morning of February 1st is February 4th, 5 days before the ransom deadline. Gould had previously estimated that the probability of Nancy Guthrie being alive was already under 10% at the 1-month mark. His 72-hour assessment was not an emotional read. It was a clinical application of what is known about elderly cardiac patients: medication dependency, physical trauma, and the physiological limits of survival in the described circumstances. If he is correct, and every piece of evidence, every expert analysis, every clinical logic point supports him, then here is what February 9th actually was. It was a deadline set by someone who knew or strongly suspected that Nancy Guthrie was already gone. It was a date chosen specifically because it would give the appearance of an ongoing active kidnapping situation, a ticking clock, during a period when the investigation was still in its early stages. It was designed to absorb law enforcement resources into a hostage rescue scenario, to keep the media focused on a transaction that would never happen, and to delay the moment when investigators would stop asking "where is she?" and start asking what actually happened. When February 9th arrived and the deadline passed in silence, no follow-up note, no new demand, no escalation, the silence was not the silence of a kidnapper who got scared. It was the silence of someone who had no more use for the kidnapping story. The narrative had served its purpose. The investigation had been redirected, and the real question, what happened in that house and why, was still buried under the debris of a Bitcoin ransom that was never going to be collected. 5 pieces of evidence. Ransom notes sent to media outlets, not to the family who had the money. No proof of life, ever, across 32 days of an alleged captivity. Blood at the front door. Her blood, before she was ever moved anywhere. 40 minutes inside. The timeline of a search or an improvised crisis. Not a professional abduction. A medication window that closed by February 4th, 5 days before the ransom deadline opened. One conclusion: this was never a kidnapping. So if it was never a kidnapping, what was it? Let us build the answer from the ground up. Not from rumor, not from anonymous sources, not from speculation. From the confirmed evidence and the verified on-air analysis of people who have spent their professional lives inside exactly this type of crime. Suspect on that doorbell footage has identifiable features. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer has called him the single most actionable lead in the case, citing his visible eyebrows, mustache, and a pinky ring he wears. Thousands of hours of surveillance footage of vehicles in the Catalina foothills from that night are still under review. Someone right now knows who that man is. Someone knows what happened in that house during those 40 minutes. And when they come forward, when the DNA comes back, when the surveillance footage is matched, when the lead that breaks this case finally surfaces, the story that emerges will not be a kidnapping. It never was. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 33 days as of this recording. The investigation is still active. The DNA from inside her home, a mixed sample containing material from more than one person, is still being analyzed at a private laboratory in Florida. Thousands of hours of surveillance footage are still under review. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI have both said this remains an active, ongoing investigation, and that they will continue until Nancy is located or every lead is exhausted. Somewhere right now, someone knows what happened in that house. The FBI tip line is open around the clock. The family's reward is $1 million payable in cash through an anonymous reporting channel. That link and the phone number for the FBI tip line are in the description below this video. If you know something, if anything in this case connects to a person, a vehicle, a conversation, a detail you have been turning over in your mind, please submit it. The FBI has said publicly that some people with information have been hesitant to come forward out of concern for their own privacy in a high-profile case. Those tips can be submitted completely anonymously. What I want you to carry out of this video is the gap. The gap between the story we were all given and the evidence that was actually there. Between the ransom notes sent to newsrooms and the FBI official who said that was unusual and that there would normally be contact by now. Between the $6 million Bitcoin deadline and the medication window that likely closed 5 days earlier. Between the blood on the porch and the 40 minutes that no professional kidnapper would ever spend at a crime scene. Between the kidnapping narrative and every expert who has looked at this evidence and said in careful, measured professional language, this does not fit. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She was a mother and a grandmother. She was a woman of faith who went to dinner with her family on a Saturday night and simply never made it to church the next morning. She had a life and a home and a front porch where something happened that the people responsible have worked very hard to obscure. She deserves the truth, not the cover story they built.